rattling lock, the creaking door, the footsteps walking down. Don't we all love the theatrical feel of this piece from the very first sounds that greet our ears? Even if it had never been made into movie form, it's all here, isn't it? In fact, as much as I think that the movie is wonderful, I still love to hear this piece without the interference of visuals, because the music and sound effects alone create such a fabulous and detailed image in my mind. I love how the bells ring on F first. It feels like the clock striking at the hour of judgment. But then, just a couple bars later, they ring again, half a step lower. And since we're in the key of E minor, that first F is so dissonant, but then this resolution down to E in the bells feels less like a resolution and more like a darkening of the skies? Perhaps a losing sight of the blue skies? Or feeling the damp chill of the building as we move down the corridor? We have this F chiming here. These are the bells. Well, of course, you can't really tell the dissonance unless we place the E minor sketch underneath. This is what we have in the bass. That's laying out our E minor. Well, if I play and then we push this against it, ooh, you can hear. That is the harmonic clash, which we hear at the very beginning. But then, as the bells ring, and then a couple bars later, it's sort of a resolution. But if we have this, listen now. Doesn't it feel a bit darker? In fact, I want to talk about the musical heritage of this song first, before going any further, because there are some fascinating connections. I think we can all agree that this is one of the most theatrical, perhaps the most theatrical piece of music on this entire album. But we can even get more detailed, more specific than that. One of the names that frequently comes up in serious discussions about this song is Kurt Weill. Kurt Weill. Who is he? Because he's obviously not a band member, nor was he a producer. In fact, he never had any connections. He had zero connections to the band itself. Kurt Weill was a famous early to mid 20th century German Jewish composer in the classical tradition, whose music crossed over all kinds of barriers and influenced all kinds of artists, and who wrote, guess what? Operettas. Now, it's been said that this piece was written as an homage to Weill's operettas, and while I couldn't find any primary source material to prove that statement, if you take the time to listen to, let's say, Weill's most famous operetta, the Dreigroschenoper, or in English, the Threepenny Opera, and here's a link. The stylistic connection is almost inescapable. Why do I make such a big deal about this connection? Well, it's because the symbolism of it, here at this point in the album, at this moment in Pink's journey, is utterly beautiful. Just think about this for a moment. This piece, the trial, the moment at which Pink takes stock of all he's done and believed throughout his whole journey into this totalitarian Nazi-style ideology, this point at which all of his beliefs and behavior are judged, this music is modeled after a composer who was not only Jewish, but who had to flee Germany because both he and his creative work was targeted by the Nazis. But wait, there's more. Of course, you all know about Pink Floyd's famous The Wall concert in Berlin on the site of the Berlin Wall. But do you know what was the very first stage performance in Berlin after World War II? The Threepenny Opera. Yes, Kurt Weill's Drei Groschen Oper was the first stage performance after the war in August 1945. Wolf von Eckert wrote that audience members climbed over ruins and passed through a tunnel to reach the open-air auditorium deprived of its ceiling. In addition to the smell of dead bodies trapped beneath the rubble, the actors themselves were haggard, starved, and in genuine rags. Many of the actors had only just been released from concentration camp. They sang, not well, but free. Talk about outside the wall indeed. And so I think that whether intentional or not, the symbolism should not be lost on us that this song, out of all the songs on this album, is the one most closely modeled after the music of a composer whose life was upended by the Nazis, whose art was banned during that era, and whose work was the first stage performance in Berlin after the war by people who had experienced, even barely survived, the extreme brutality of that regime. The symbolism of all that is really quite moving and powerful. All right, on with the music. So we've just followed the footsteps into the courtroom, but let's not miss that wonderfully heavy, plodding, and omnipresent bass ostinato alternating on the root and fifth, E and B. We're strongly set up in the key of E minor. And then that beautiful entrance of the woodwinds, so many complex emotions tucked into that little line. It creaks like a door. It cries like a child. It's afraid. It's begging. It's hopeful. It shrieks. It's beaten with a whip. It's tired. It wilts. Notice how it's weighed down by that bass ostinato. It could be a line from Mozart. It has such potential for elegance and grace. Here's the bass ostinato again. And here's the little line. Isn't it so elegant? Or we could articulate it differently. So many different things that could be done with it. But then if we place it with this bass, heavy. It can't ever grow wings and fly. It's like a fragile creature weighed down, tottering under some too heavy load. And that is the melodic figure, actually the musical material out of which this entire song is built. I love the way it lands on the F chord. Remember, I just spoke about this dissonant F. It's so strongly propelled down the scale to arrive there. It wouldn't feel right to go. But as we land so firmly, as if someone kind of pushed us down the steps, and when we land firmly at the bottom, it's ouch. Ouch, the dissonance. Because just like the bells in the opening bars, we are so clearly on F, but the bass keeps plodding away on E minor. There it all is. And so not only do we have the melodic material for the song now, but we also have the key to the harmonic scheme. Strong driving scale-based lines propelled toward an arrival point, clashing at that arrival point with other chords. It's like a larger-than-life magnified appoggiatura. In fact, if I had to sum up in one sentence the music of this song, I might say it's an enormous elephant-sized appoggiatura. Well, what's that word anyway? It's an Italian musical term for a specific kind of ornament, and it comes from the word meaning to lean, and quite literally, that's what we do. We lean into a dissonance on a strong beat, and then lightly glide out of it into harmony. Here's another example of it in the song. A line later, was caught red-handed showing feelings. Was caught red-handed showing feelings. This is the appoggiatura. Feelings. Because our harmony note is this light one on ings. The dissonant note is feel. And do we ever feel it, right? Feelings. Was caught red-handed showing feelings. And if you listen to the actual recording, you hear that sort of emphasis on the dissonance, the heavy lean into something, and then the lighter glide away into consonants. So in this song, we have elephant-sized leaning into dissonance. And isn't it great? It implies great weight and immense effort. Think of picking up and moving bricks, not the little ones. I'm talking large blocks, like what Pink's wall is built of. Even better, these great big bricks are being swung through the air like the accusations being hurled at him as each witness comes to the stand. There is weight, power, momentum, all in the musical design. And we also have to really appreciate how well Waters wears each character. I think this song is the best I've heard in terms of demonstrating his ability to adopt various personalities with his voice. I hear and I feel each character as its own distinct personality, thanks to his singing. There are so many details worth noticing along the way, and I'm not going to try to list everything or we'd be spending hours going through the score. But notice, for example, as the schoolmaster begins to speak, those wonderful little percussive xylophone triplets, when he says, "I could have flayed him into shape." It feels so much like we're watching the schoolmaster wag his finger, yada-da-da, as he speaks, or as he's nearing the end of his testimony. How the brasses step up and let us know that Mr. Schoolmaster is feeling so powerfully triumphant in his conclusion, as if he's won the case already. Just listen to the change in instrumentation from the schoolmaster's testimony to Pink's thoughts. Suddenly, the tromping bass ostinato disappears, and we shift to long sustained chords, filled out with harp arpeggios, no less. If you listen closely, that's what you hear in the orchestral part. This sudden change in rhythmic pace and instrumentation pulls our eyes away from the drama taking place in the courtroom and takes us, once again, into Pink's head. He's speaking out loud. We hear what he's saying, his response to the allegations, but we are hearing it from his perspective, that is, from a seat inside his head. Another moment I really love is the one place in which the lines overlap. Pink cries, "There must have been a door there in the wall when I came in." And just as he sings "in," the chorus sings "crazy." So we have "in" and "crazy" happening at the same moment, on the same beat, even on the same note in a way. It kind of suggests the idea that not only he is crazy now, but also kind of saying, Pink, you were crazy to enter there in the first place. That was crazy, even way back then. It's interesting to notice that for the whole duration of the witnesses' testimonies, the music is purely orchestral. It has neither the instrumentation nor the style of anything remotely rock or even remotely The Wall. This is standard theatrical music, and we simply haven't heard it anywhere on this album before. It's as if it was simply dropped in from somewhere else. Someone else even, with no connection to what has come before, until the judge begins to speak. Don't be distracted by the judge, though. Listen to the music. Suddenly, we have a guitar again. And drums. But that's not all. Listen, and you'll hear that guitar chainsawing away on the iconic Bricks of the Wall motif. As the judge roars out his sentence to the elephant-sized appoggiatura of a tune held by the orchestra, the guitar tears into this Bricks theme with a vengeance. So we then get the two musical ideas coursing through the song at the same time together. And since they're both so distinctive, so powerful, or perhaps I should say they're each so distinctive, so powerful, it sets up a sort of musical tug-of-war and antagonism, which I think is really quite fitting, because it's a musical manifestation of the incredible tension, and not only tension, but the clash of worlds, the battle that Pink is going through in his mind here. But as it continues, it organizes a bit so that it begins to sound heroic. Pink's not quitting now. He'll swim the rivers, he'll fight the monsters, cross the oceans, climb the mountains, to get through and get out of this. As the proverb goes, the only way out is through. In fact, as it charges forward, one can't resist thinking of movies like, say, Saving Private Ryan or something of that ilk. It's tank-like in its assault. Once Pink is condemned to his sentence, the judge falls silent. The crowd takes up the chant to tear down the wall, tear down the wall, and the music carries us forward on its unrelenting current. As we near the end of the song, this march-like, tank-like roar continues, starts to sound like a bomber. Suddenly we hear bombs exploding? Or is it? Is it the wall falling? Oh, wow. It's the wall being demolished. Are those dozers then? And so it sends us right back to the opening in the flesh, even as it's propelling us forward into a new world and new experience. Next time you listen to the song, notice how this motif of the wall comes through most powerfully as the wall is being destroyed. I don't think that's by accident. It's letting us know how incredibly powerful this wall is and how it wants to fight back against our efforts to demolish it as if it were a living creature itself. So now that we've explored the musical elements a bit, let's bring the lyrics into the mix. And I want to reiterate once again, because it's important for you to remember, these are just my thoughts, my perspective on this work at this point in time. And if you've been following this series, you already know that my understanding of it has significantly developed and sometimes drastically changed from the first time I listened to it, that first exposure to it, to now as I'm doing an in-depth study of it. And I expect that it will continue to evolve each time I return to it, because It's the type of artistic expression that, because its subject is the human condition, it can grow with us over time. It can speak to us differently depending on the context and circumstances of our lives and experiences. Since the trial serves both as a dramatic climax and as a review, or we could even say an abstract of the complete work, it's packed with opposites and extremes all thrown together in what might, at first glance, look like a complete mishmash. We have nihilism and optimism, deep emotion and flippant carelessness, grand theatrics and intense seriousness. But all of this is Pink's journey, offering different views of his story, of our story. Roger Waters said something in his 1979 BBC interview which helps us here. It acts as a sort of key by which we can decode what we find in this song. He said that the judge is part of him, meaning Pink, just as much as all the other characters and things he remembers. They're all in his mind, in Pink's mind. They're all memories. And at the end of it all, his judgment on himself is to de-isolate himself. Listen to that final part of that statement. Pink's judgment on himself is to de-isolate himself. We're going to keep that in mind as we work our way through. Even in the movie, each character is shown emerging from the wall that surrounds Pink. So this is a process of self-examination. Pink recalls memories. Pink recalls himself. He observes, he listens, and he judges. And as I mentioned in Stop, this is the fascinating part, the masterclass moment in which Pink shines at his very best. His powerful ability to step outside of himself, to view his life from the vantage point of an onlooker, evaluating, handling, being as objective as possible, unflinchingly honest with himself in his effort to discover the truth. On the other hand, the characters we see here, his mother, his wife, his teacher, let's be clear about the fact that the way they are portrayed is not necessarily the way they actually were. Remember that this has been a gradual, lifelong process that has shaped Pink into who and what he is now, and his view of the world and of the people in his world is also one that developed and changed over time. And from this perspective, this trial is not merely about himself and his actions and decisions, but it's also his attempts to determine whether these characters who had such an influence in his life were actually as he perceived them to be. In other words, how much did they contribute to his alienation, and how much of it is strictly his own doing? Now, is this trial meant to determine if Pink will be freed from his cell or not? I don't believe so, because remember, Pink has already decided to go home. He has already decided that the uniform and the show are not for him. He's already decided to stop it all. So theoretically, he's already free. But remember what I said back in the previous song, Stop, about why he's on trial. He's on trial by his own choice, of his own accord. We could say he's put himself on trial because he has to know whether it is he, Pink, who has been guilty all this time. So here's the order in which the characters appear during this trial. First the prosecutor, then the teacher, next comes Pink, then Pink's wife, Pink's mother, Pink again, and finally the judge. So let's look at each one in that order. Our first view of the proceedings comes as we follow the prosecutor into the courtroom, those great footsteps that we followed in. It's morning. The first trial of the day, signifying the beginning. The bells are heralding the fact that Pink has a chance at new beginnings, Well, also, as I said, that step down also reminds us of the gravity of what's taking place. Now remember that both the prosecutor and the judge are actually Pink himself. Keeping that in mind, notice how the prosecutor addresses the judge. Worm, your honor. Now, we've seen how worms have been an important symbol through this whole album. They've been used to represent primarily two things, both decay and lack of individuality. So the judge's identity of worm is a recognition by Pink that his own judgment, his own mind, is affected by these things. And then the charges. He was caught red-handed, showing feelings of an almost human nature. Or, from a different vantage point, this path he's been on all this time has been anti-human, inhumane, or against human nature. His humanity has been actively suppressed. Any mere hint of humanity in the form of emotion or feeling is a crime. This will not do. And so the first witness is called the schoolmaster, chronologically the first brick in Pink's wall. The schoolmaster's plea is for himself. I would, but I could not. Who's to blame? I always said he'd come to no good in the end. I always knew he was a hopeless case. What could I have done? And his solution? Hammer and flay, even up to this very day. But he was prevented from getting his way because they interfered. The Bleeding Hearts and the artists. The who? The Bleeding Hearts and artists? Well, that's a wide open door begging for us to enter, but I'm going to save it for the next song, and you can guess why. For now, it's enough to note that the schoolmaster blames the Bleeding Hearts and the artists for Pink's transgressions and non-standard behavior, and believes that the only way to flay him into shape is with the hammer. Now, remember, Pink blamed the schoolmaster for his need to isolate himself and for the dictator that he became. So there's a conflict in the testimony here. Who is right, Pink or the schoolmaster? And while we're tempted at this point to feel sympathetic towards Pink, we must remember the whole story, examine the entire process from beginning to end, this process by which the gentle child Pink became the Pink we just recently heard screaming, "If I had my way, I'd have all of you shot." That process of examination is exactly what Pink is attempting to do in this trial, so that he can rightly judge himself. And after the schoolmaster's testimony, we're given a glimpse into what's going on in Pink's mind. Crazy. Toys in the attic. I am crazy. That crazy is another appoggiatura, by the way. Crazy. Truly gone fishing. They must have taken my marbles away. We recognize each of these as idioms of speech used to express the idea of insanity, of being crazy. Truly gone fishing? Not all there in the head. Same with taking my marbles away. Sometimes we say something like, he lost his marbles. Isn't it interesting that each of these expressions somehow makes use of simple childhood activities and interests? Toys, fishing, marbles. Perhaps they were chosen specifically because they do somehow conjure childhood, since the story of how Pink got to where he is has to be traced all the way back to his early years. After all, that's when the foundations of his wall were laid. But I think the most important thing to draw from them is that Pink is muttering to himself the idea that he is not right in the head. He's messed up. He's crazy. In other words, as Pink hears the accusations and testimony against him in the courtroom of his mind, or more specifically, as Pink examines his life as objectively as he can, and the evidence begins to build against him, this is what he begins to think of himself. It's even more than that. You know how this song ends with Pink being sentenced according to his deepest fear. right? And if we're not paying attention, we might assume that this deep fear of Pink's is to be exposed to his peers, but not so fast. That's the sentence. So what then is his deepest fear? The possibility that he might be insane. Crazy. More on this in a little bit. The next witness comes to the stand now, Pink's wife. Her testimony gives an important perspective. Listen to her accusation. You should have talked to me more often than you did, but no, you had to go your own way. Have you broken any homes up lately? You little ship, you're in it now. Why is this testimony so important in this trial? It's because it's not actually the wife's testimony, but rather Pink's own understanding. Remember, Pink is judging himself. And unlike what he did in the past, accusing his wife of betrayal, actually obsessing over it, asking, how could she treat me this way, and all of that. Now, as he's attempting to be objective and honest, he's facing the fact that actually he is most responsible for the breakdown of their relationship. He drove her away. He is to blame for her infidelity. More than the testimonies of the schoolmaster and the mother, this one points to Pink's own failings, his own guilt. Here is where he finally owns his part in the building of his wall, in the development of his isolation, as he recognizes his failure of his responsibility toward his wife, his mistreatment of her. He recognizes that his building of his wall is what pushed his wife away, isolated her from himself, drove her to find connection with someone else, rather than, as he had been convinced up until now, her infidelity being responsible for the wall. And so, little by little, brick by brick, Pink begins to see that it is he who has been guilty all this time. The wife's testimony ends with, just 5 minutes, Worm, Your Honor, him and me alone. Notice how clearly Pink understands his own guilt in the matter, how deserving he feels he is of punishment, even to the point of being outside of the law. Him and me alone. In fact, he feels it so acutely that he goes so far as to say, I hope they throw away the key. Which key? The key to the wall. In other words, it's a way of saying, even though I want to go home, I don't deserve it. For what I've done to her, it would serve me right to remain locked away, imprisoned in my isolation for the rest of my life. Pink is digging deep into his heart. Pink is honest with himself now. Pink is breaking free of himself. The third and final witness in this trial is Pink's mother. And it's interesting to look at her testimony because she doesn't actually accuse Pink of anything. It's more of a complaint, or we could say a lament about the natural course of life. Remember in Mother what we heard about her. She won't let you fly, but she might let you sing. Well, now Pink begins to realize that she didn't actually have evil intentions. She wasn't trying to suffocate or cripple him. It was love. She loved him. Now, did she manifest this love perfectly? Most probably not, because who does? Was their relationship healthy at all times? Probably not. But hers was motherly love nonetheless. Just listen to his mother's entrance on the scene. The desperation, the pain, the desire. And the first words she speaks are not addressed to the judge, nor to the prosecutor, or the jury, or the witnesses, but to Pink, to her baby, her son, as she aches to hold him in her arms. Come to mother, baby. Let me hold you in my arms. Pink is finally recognizing his mother's deep, sincere, and absolute love for him her only child. In her testimony to the judge, she makes no accusation towards Pink. Instead, kind of shifting attention towards herself, as if she feels she is to blame, or at least is being accused, for Pink's outcome. My lord had never wanted him to get in any trouble. The next line might make us question her motives. After all, Pink always felt that she held him too tightly, and here she's talking to herself. Why'd he ever have to leave me? And we could answer, of course he had to leave, to differentiate himself from his mother, to step out on his own, to have any hope of maturing in a healthy way. And that is true, but I don't think we should take this quite so literally. I think it's more consistent and makes more sense to hear it just as we hear her opening babe cry. That is, as an outburst of the sorrow she feels for her son's outcome. She concludes with the plea, "Worm, Your Honor, let me take him home." It's interesting, isn't it, that home is where Pink wants to go. I want to go home, to be myself again, to feel as I once did. All this is what Pink now understands that his mother always wanted for him. To be home, to be safe, to be himself. I'm going to say that again. She wanted him to be himself. That is home for Pink. To be happy. All her desire and efforts toward that end have been, even from the beginning, not for her selfish comfort, but for his sake, for his well-being. What a surprise! Pink has been so deeply immersed in his view of the world and the people in his life, so convinced of the injustice and injury of it all, that for most of this journey, even if we disagree with Pink's responses, we are still sympathetic towards his struggles and hypercritical of the others, his mother included. But of course, when we stop to think for just a moment how common and likely it is for young people to misjudge and misinterpret their elders, their guardians, just think of the classic teenager, antagonistic towards parents, teachers, school, because they perceive it as restrictive, controlling, even taking away their rights. Every little fault found in the authority figures in their young lives takes on an exaggerated form in their eyes, and every failing feels like a betrayal. Of course, usually as young people pass through this phase and step into early adulthood, they begin to see beyond their parents' mistakes and shortcomings. They begin to appreciate the fact that in spite of the faults and mistakes and failures, what lies behind it all is a deep and lasting care for their well-being. It's a tender affection. They understand that, yes, things are not perfect, but regardless, they are loved. And that's the point to which Pink has finally arrived now. And after hearing his mother's plea, we are given another glimpse of his thoughts about himself. Is he defensive, justifying himself and his choices? No. He's again mulling the thought that he is, in fact, crazy to have done what he did, to have taken this path. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that he is trying to invoke insanity as a defense. No. He is looking at himself from the outside now, and he sees bars in the window. He sees foolish, disorganized, incomplete conclusions, toys in the attic, somebody divorced from reality with no sense of responsibility or accountability, gone fishing, somebody who is clearly not right in the head or missing marbles. And in his shock and astonishment, he concludes, and it strikes me as an expression of not so much desperation, but a kind of exclamation of bewildered amazement. There must have been a door in the wall when I came in. There must have been. And as Pink continues to work through the evidence, the chorus of voices sings as if he's recognizing that every piece of evidence speaks a common voice, pointing to him as being crazy, over the rainbow. He is crazy. This stunned realization, I've pointed my finger at everyone and everything else, but in fact, all this time, it was me. Then here comes the judge. This is where things get a little bit tricky if we're not consistent, but it's not hard as long as we remember that the judge is Pink judging himself. So why then does he address the judge as Worm, Your Honor? Quite simply, it's representative of the fact that Pink's faculties of judgment, his own mind and conscience, have been impacted by his life choices, subject to his experiences. His best self is affected by moral decay. His best self is prone to spineless inaction, to brainwashing. His best self easily succumbs to the herd mentality, to selfishness, to unbalanced decisions. That is true for every single human being on this planet. The moment we think ourselves safe and unable to err is the moment we lose our grip on reality, and the moment we become a menace to society. None of us is invincible. We are all at risk of judging wrongly, simply by nature, by the fact that we are human. And the only way to keep ourselves on the right track is to recognize and remember that we are not immune. Each one of us is capable of becoming a monster. Each one of us has the potential to delude ourselves, or to simply not stand up to evil, not to go against the grain. Well, from this perspective, that old Isaac Watts hymn with the line, "For such a worm as I," is right on target. And it's funny how context matters, isn't it? If you're a traditionally churched Protestant, you might have heard it sung at some point, but common practice rewrites that line to remove the worm reference because, well, it comes across as melodramatically groveling in our modern era. But maybe if we import Pink Floyd's ideas, Watts has something important to say there. Anyway, back to the trial. Once we are clear about the judge's identity, we can appreciate Pink's judgment even more. His objectivity, his clarity of thought, his logic. He begins to take on, I could say, morally heroic proportions. The evidence before the court is incontrovertible. In all my years of judging, I have never heard before of someone more deserving of the full penalty of law. Incontrovertible, indisputable, undeniable, irrefutable, unassailable. Basically, Pink is guilty. Period. And not only is he guilty of his own condition, but he's guilty when it comes to the suffering both his mother and his wife have had to endure. In other words, the people in his life that have been abused through him. Think back through this album and remember Pink's thoughts and feelings towards these two women especially, how certain he was of his position and victimhood, how systematically he broke away and separated himself from them, how unimaginable the idea that he could possibly change course. But now, the reversal is astonishing. Now, when an accused is taken to court, he is always asked, "How do you plead?" Has Pink been given that opportunity? Because you can't just sentence someone without hearing their defense or whatever it is they have to say about themselves on the matter. Has Pink spoken? Does he plead guilty or not? Well, the judge says, "Since, my friend, you have revealed your deepest fear." In other words, Pink has spoken for himself. And in so doing, he has not merely confessed guilt. Crazy, over the rainbow, I am crazy, meaning I am crazy. I must have been out of my mind to do what I did. But obviously I was, or am, crazy enough to have done it. And so the sentence is handed down with terrifying finality. I sentence you to be exposed before your peers. Tear down the wall. It's worth pausing for a minute and remembering that this whole album was inspired by a moment of human weakness that Roger Waters himself displayed and was ashamed of. That episode, during one of his concerts, when he spit on an invasively enthusiastic fan. And in a way, this album is his own self-exposure to the world, to his peers, of his dark side. In other words, it's his self-inflicted sentence on himself for that ignominious moment. That brings us to the healing power of confession. When our behavior has harmed another, we can't always undo the damage. Many times, the injury, the harm is permanent. And even if it heals, scars remain. It's sobering to stop and think about how many times we've unwittingly hurt someone as we go about our lives. Sometimes it's unavoidable, purely accidental. Other times, if only we'd been more humble, more careful, more self-aware, more compassionate, we might have spared someone a lifetime of pain to some degree or other. But when we choose to be fully open about our failings, to be exposed before our peers, to tear down the wall of self-defense, it creates an opportunity for healing, both ours and the ones we've injured. The great Greek philosophical maxim to know thyself is not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit and healing of those we've affected. And so it is with Pink. He determines that the only right sentence is to tear down this wall, to be fully exposed, to allow everyone to see that his path was madness, crazed insanity. He's been wrong all this time. The world that he built up in his mind was a figment of his imagination, something completely divorced from reality. I have to mention the movie A Beautiful Mind, which is loosely based on the life of John Nash, who was a mathematician, actually a recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics, and who also lived with schizophrenia. If you've ever seen the movie, you'll remember how he's gathering all manner of unrelated information, finding supposed patterns and connections that are supposed to be secret codes, hidden messages, and he's not just believing, but he's living his life according to this completely fictitious information, plans, events, and people that exist only in his paranoid mind. Now, I've deliberately avoided suggesting in this series that Pink is mentally ill, and I'm not doing that now. But by creating a similarly fictitious world, an alternate reality based on only his own bits of information that he's gathered and linked and interpreted according to what he wants, is how Pink came to believe what he did about the people in his life. This is his insanity. This is his craziness. And this is his greatest fear. Yes, Pink is crazy. He's so focused on his own feelings, his own hurt, his own trauma, that he's completely divorced from the reality of the people around him. This is the crime that every person, every community, every nation, every society must guard against. We must know ourselves. And yes, we will find in our self-examination, just like Pink did, that there are walls in existence which should not be there. The remedy? Tear down this wall. And I love how the heavy equipment gets right to work, even as we're still sitting in the courtroom. And remember, the wall is just a symbol, symbolic of all the barriers we erect in our lives. And not only the wall, Pink's uniform goes too, meaning everything that is put on, a disguise, a facade, an adopted character, not genuinely me, it all goes. And finally, Pink's conscience is clear. Not only has he acknowledged his failures and wrongness, confessed his sins, but he's removed all the trappings and baggage and self-protectionism that he had erected and carried. If we veer toward religious terminology, which is not out of line considering the religious and even biblical overtones of this work, we can say that Pink has come to the moment of rebirth. He's born again. And so the trial is over. Pink is now able to go home with a clean conscience, knowing how he got here, owning his responsibility, confessing his role, choosing to discard it all. In other words, he learned. He truly learned. He knows this part of himself. He knows. And as I said in the previous video about stop, this is the same process by which one learns to master an instrument or any wonderful skill, to make music freely, passionately, beautifully, without inhibition, so that the outcome is not crippled by wooden programmed recitations. In this same way, we can get to learn, to know, to master our own selves. We could say this is how we turn our own lives into music. This is what Pink has done. He's done the work. He's walked the path. He's taken himself into the deep recesses of his own mind, his own heart, not only for the sake of sightseeing, to see what he finds there, but to study it, to understand it, to judge it, and to act and make life choices based on that knowledge. And that is how he becomes free. And so, I'll see you next time outside the wall.